Hi, and welcome to part 1 of this tutorial series, how to create a beginner level fingerstyle guitar arrangement of a folk song. There's going to be 3 steps to this process. Step number 1, we're going to tab out the melody and then transpose if necessary. Step number 2, we're going to add the bass notes. These are the bottom notes of each chord here. And then step number 3, we're going to add these inner chord tones. So let's have a look at the folk melody which we're going to use. So this melody I've found in a beginner's harmonica book, and when you first start out playing harmonica, you're learning all these pieces in the same key, the key of C. But as we're going to see, this isn't necessarily the best key to play this particular folk song in. So we're going to have a look into the reasons why that might be in a minute. But first of all, just want to play through the melody just in case you're not familiar with it already. Okay, so that's the melody we're going to be arranging. So I just want to talk a little bit about why it's a good idea to tab out the melody first of all. And by the way, if you would like, I could do an extra video on how to tab out the melody, but for this video I'll work on the assumption that you already know how to do this. So the reason we tab the melody out is because we want to see where all these melody notes are going to lie with reference to their position on the guitar. So you see here the melody starts off on quite low frets and open strings, and then in this section we go a bit higher, we go up to the 7th fret, 8th fret, and our highest note there is the 10th fret. So with regard to this, I just want to talk a little bit about the range of this piece. So the range is the distance between the lowest note to the highest note. So here's our lowest note, it just happens to be the first note of the piece as well. And as you can see, that's C. And then our highest note is here, which is a D, but it's an octave higher. So the range could be considered an octave and a second from C to D, an octave higher, or it could also be known as the interval of a ninth. Okay, so I'm just going to explain why this isn't very good for this beginner style arrangement. So starting off, we got quite low notes on the guitar here. These will be fine when we're playing these the chords which are suggested above, C chords and G chords. Remember, we're going to be using mostly open chords in this arrangement. The problem really comes later on when we go up to these higher notes. As you can see, if you're playing an open G chord here, these notes are going to be far too high to get your hands to for a beginner's arrangement. So that's going to cause a real problem. There's another main reason why the key of C isn't so good for this arrangement. To see this, we're going to just open this other program up, and it's to do with the chords in the key of C major. So most folk songs use the chords 1, 4, 5 and 6. So let's have a look at these chords in the key of C major. We have C, the 1 chord, F, 4, G is your 5 chord, and A minor is your 6 chord. Okay, so there's no real problems with the 1, 5 and 6 chords, they're all open chords. The problem comes with this 4th chord, or the 4 chord. As you can see, there's a bar going across the 2 top strings. And in general, when you're doing an arrangement, you want to avoid barring unless you have to bar across strings. But particularly at a beginner level piece aimed at a beginner, you want to try and avoid any of that barring at all, really. So, as I say, chords 1, 5 and 6 are fine, they all use these open strings, but that chord number 4 is going to cause us a bit of problem when we're creating our arrangement. So let's have a look back at the arrangement now. Okay, so what's the solution to these two problems that we have in the key of C? Well, the solution is to transpose it to a different key. And the key I've chosen for this piece to transpose it into is the key of G major. So here's the melody now taken into the key of G major. Okay, so a few things to note. Notice how the melody now is the open third string. And that top note that we had issue with before is now the 5th fret of the top string, so that's much easier to get to when we're playing this D chord here. It's going to pose a little bit of trouble, but nothing major. And as you can see, all these other notes are open strings or 3rd fret, 2nd fret, so absolutely perfect for our arrangement. Another good thing is that we haven't got the melody note coming onto any of these bottom 3 strings. You want to avoid the melody coming onto any of these bottom 3 strings if you can. The reason being is that these bottom 3 strings are going to be used for either bass notes or chord tones. So yeah, you want the melody, if possible, to be on these top 3 strings. It can occasionally, your melody can encroach on that 4th string, but in general, yeah, try and keep it on those top 3 strings. So as you can see, this is perfect. We've got the melody starting there, and then going all the way up to the 5th fret of the top string. So that's a really good area for the beginner guitarist to play within. So now we're going to have a look and see why the chords of G major, in the key of G major, are better for this folk song than the chords in C major. So once again, we're having a look at the 1, 4, 5 and 6 chords. Here's the 1 chord, an open G chord. The 4 chord is now turned into an open C chord, so there's none of that barring that we had previously on that F chord. The D chord is fine, just your normal D chord. And then the 6th chord is an E minor. So you see, these are now all very common open chord shapes that a beginner would be happy to play. Right, so let's go back to the arrangement now and go to the next step. So step number 2 is going to be adding the bass notes. So here you can see all the bass notes have been added. These are all these notes with the stems going down, are your bass notes here. So these are just the bottom notes of each chord shape. So if you're playing a C chord, your bottom note's going to be the 3rd fret of the 5th string. If you're playing a G chord, your bottom note's going to be the 3rd fret of the bottom string. So if you like, you could actually play this through as a very simple arrangement in its own right. It won't probably sound that exciting. It's the bare minimum that you could get away with for an arrangement, just the bass note and the melody note. So what we're going to do to make it more interesting is we're going to add inner harmony notes. So I just want to say, normally when you're working out these harmony notes, you're going to want to work out the fingering of the piece as well. The reason being is you might come up with a really good arrangement, the harmony notes sound great, but when you actually come to play the piece and work out the fingering, you find that you've run out of fingers in certain areas, or perhaps it's a bit awkward, the fingering for your harmony notes that you've added. So normally you'd want to do those two things together, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to do them separately. So this video we're going to be looking at the harmony notes, and then in the second video we're going to be looking at the best fingering to use for this song. Right, so we're going to start by looking at these first 2 notes. As you can see, this is not a complete bar, this is a pickup bar. And personally, I like to have the first 2 notes leading into the first chord unaccompanied. I think it just makes a nice little start, a nice little lead into that first chord. If, however, you did want to harmonize these first 2 intro notes, you'd use the dominant chord, a D chord there, to harmonize those first pickup notes. So next we're going to have a look at our first proper chord, the G chord, and we're going to start adding these harmony notes now. So I'm just going to double the root. So you've got the root here already. I'm going to double that. As you can see on top here, we've got the 3rd of the chord is the melody. So we've got the root and the 3rd and doubled root. What we're going to do here is add the 5th. So the 5th of the chord tends to give the chord more structure, more body. It strengthens the chord. I find with chords, if you add more roots and 3rds, it tends to weaken the sound. fifths tend to strengthen the sound of the chord. So they're really there to sort of bulk the chord out and make it sound a lot stronger. Okay, notice how I've left out the third here. So normally you have the root note here, and then there's the third of the chord of the G there, second fret of the fifth string. There's two reasons why I've left out the third here. One is a reason of practicality. Okay, so when we're playing this G chord, our thumb's going to be on that bottom note, and then our three fingers are going to be here. So we've already used up the thumb and three fingers of the right hand playing all these other strings. The second reason is more to do with how it sounds. So what you need to remember is the guitar is actually sounds an octave lower than it's written. So we're looking at very low notes here. Now if you've got an interval of a third, that low down, it's going to sound very clogged up, it's going to clash, and it's going to sound quite bit muddy really. The reason being is if you look into the harmonic series, you see that an octave or a fifth sounds much better low down due to the harmonics. So an interval of a third, you're going to get lots of these harmonics clashing, and it's just not going to sound very nice. So on a G chord that's really low down, it's best to leave the third out. Otherwise it's going to sound very muddy. So let's have a look at our next chord. So we've got a D chord here, and we've run into a bit of a problem here, because as you can see the melody note's quite low down, but the bass note's quite high up, and that's the open fourth string. So we can't actually get any harmony notes in the middle. But there is a solution to this, and the way you get around this is you could play an inversion. So here's our D chord that we're looking at the moment. As you can see, the root was there and the fifth was there. We couldn't get any melody notes in the middle. But what you could do is to take the third of the chord, which would normally be on the top string, and you move that to the bottom string. So now you've got the third will be your new bass note, and as you can see, the root which is here has now become an inner harmony tone. So let's have a look back at the arrangement to see this more clearly. So here's our root, the current bass note, and what we're going to do, we're just going to take that out, and we're just going to place it on the second fret of the bottom string. But what we're going to do is we're going to put that root back in, but as you can see now it's one of the inner tones of our chord. So there's our D inversion chord. Okay, so that's our first bar done. Let's have a look at this second bar. So here we have a C chord, and we're going to do something very similar to this G we had earlier. We're going to add the root. So you can see the melody is the third of the chord is on that top string. And once again we're going to add the fifth as well. Notice how we're going to leave out the third of this chord for those two reasons I gave earlier. You've got your thumb and three fingers are taken up, and also that interval of a third here, although no way near as bad as that interval lower down on the G, it's still going to sound a little bit clashy, and it's not really necessary to add the third there because we've already got it on that top melody note, so we can quite happily take that out. Okay, so next we're going to have a look at this G chord. So here we've got the root, and the melody is the fifth of the chord. So as you can see, we're missing the third at the moment. Now you can actually get away, especially in a folk song context, of just having a chord which has the root and the fifth. It still sounds fine. So that's what I'm going to do for this chord here. But later on, I'm going to play the G slightly differently just to add a bit of variety. I'm going to play it as a complete G chord. So I'm going to show you how to do that later. It's similar to what we did here really, is using an inversion, but I'll show you exactly how to do that later on. But for now, that's fine. You don't need to add the fifth here because we've already got the fifth as the melody note, so we can move on to the next bar. So in this next bar we have once again a C chord, and we can do just as the C chord previous, just double the root and add the fifth, as we've already got the third as the melody note on top there. Okay, and we come in across another D chord, and we're going to do the same as we did here. We're going to turn it into an inverted chord. So we're going to take out the root as the bass note, make the F sharp the bass note, but we're going to bring back in the root as that inner harmony tone there. So playing that D as an inversion. Okay, so that's the D chord, and then we're going to finally look at the last chord of this section, of the A section, which is G chord. As you can see, the melody note here is doubling the root. So what we're going to do, it won't be a complete chord, we're just going to add the fifth. So it's like a G5 chord. It's just got the root, fifth, and the root there. Okay, so that's our A section completed. Here's a little trick that you can use for the second, or the repeat of the A section. And we're just going to copy this. And for the repeated A section, we're just going to paste it in. So we've got, at the moment, we've got an exact repeat of that previous A section. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to make a few little changes so it's not exactly the same A section repeated the same as last time. So here we've got our first G chord once again. I'm going to leave that as it is. I'm quite happy with that G chord. This is a D chord. What we're going to do here is we're just going to take out that inversion. So it's just going to be root and fifth here on this chord. So it's gone back to what it was originally, just the bass note and the fifth. Okay, C chord I'm just going to leave alone as it is, that's fine. Okay, so this G chord we looked at earlier, and remember I said I was quite happy just having that as like more of a G5 chord, just a root and fifth. Well here, similar to what we did with the Ds earlier on, we're going to turn this into an inversion. So the way to do that on this chord, we'll just have a look at this other program. So here's your normal G chord. So you can see the root is the bass note. What we're going to do is we're going to take out the root as the bass note, and we're going to make that the third of the chord, the bass note, that B. So just going to show you how to do that in your arrangement. So all you do is take out that root note and then change it to the third. So now the third is the bass note. As you can see, you've already got a doubling of the root there. So you've got the third, the root, and the fifth is the melody. So you've got complete G chord there now. Also notice how the bass note movement sounds nice here. You've got a C, going to a B, and then going back to the note C again there. So it's a nice bit of movement there. Let's have a quick look at the next bar. So going to leave the C chord as fine as it is. Once again I'm going to take out the inversion here, just to add a bit of variety. So you've just got the root and fifth of that D chord, so it's more like a D5 chord. And the final chord is the G chord once again. So as you can see, it's more like a G5 chord. You've got the root note, fifth, and doubling of the root note. I don't recommend turning this G chord into an inverted chord though, because you've come to the end of the phrase. You really want a strong chord to finish that phrase off, and the strongest chord you can get is a chord in root position there. So now we can move on to the B section. So this is a contrasting section. So just going to mention, actually, should have mentioned this earlier really, but I'll mention it now. The song format of this piece is A, B, A, very commonly used in folk music. So you've got the A section, repeat the A section, a contrasting B section, and then a final repeat of the A section. So let's have a look at this B section. So as you can see, the melody starts there. We've got another pickup note. Let's have a look at this first G chord of the B section. As you can see here, we've got a doubling of the root already, because you've got the bass note is the root note, and then you've got the root note on top as well. Once again, you could play this chord as an inversion, but I recommend against it, because it's the first chord of the phrase. As with being the last chord, you want that to be a strong chord, so I'm going to keep that as a root position chord. So we haven't got any thirds or fifths yet, so let's add in the third. And what we're going to do is we're going to just triple the root for the moment. And as you can see, unfortunately we've got no room there for the fifth. So I'm just going to go through a few alternatives, but then I'm going to explain why I'm actually going to use what I've already come up with here as the for playing this chord. So what you could do is to take the root out here and add the fifth here. So then you've have a complete chord. You'd have root, fifth, third, and then a doubling of the root. Problem here though is that it's a bit awkward to have a gap right there between those two strings. You normally, when you're doing a fingerstyle arrangement, you want those three notes to be played that are adjacent to each other. So although this might sound good and you can still play it like that, the way that I like to play this chord is just by tripling the root here. So it's going to sound like a bit of a weaker chord. Remember I talked about having the fifth, which really strengthens the chord. Unfortunately here I've decided not to add the fifth, but I've sacrificed that because I wanted to have the top three strings for playing this chord. Let's have a look at this C chord, so we can just do what we normally do and add double the root and add the fifth. Okay, so the D chord had caused us a bit of trouble earlier on. If you remember, the melody note was quite high down and the root note was quite high up, so we couldn't fit in any harmony notes in the middle. Well, luckily here on this D chord, as you can see, the melody is now on that top string and it's the third of the chord. So what we can do, we can just fill in double the root and add the fifth, and as you can see, you can now just play this as an everyday normal D chord. So that's made life a lot easier. So let's have a look at this next chord. So we've got a G again, similar to that G that we had earlier actually. Let's see if we can find it. So it's very similar to this G. As you can see, we've got the root note here and we've got the fifth of the chord. So we could double the root there, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to turn it into an inversion once again. So remember, what we can do is we take out the root being the bass note and we turn the third into the bass note. So now we have a complete chord. We've got the third, the B, the root note, the G, and the fifth of the chord, the D. So that's a complete chord now. Another nice thing, once again, have a look at the bass movement. You're moving from the second fret there, the B, to the third fret there, the C. So you've got a nice little bit of bass movement, which eventually leads up to the D there. So let's have a look at the next bar. We have a C chord. Let's just fill that in as we usually have. So double the root, add the fifth. Okay, so here's a D chord. As you can see, the melody note here is doubling the root, so we could add the fifth right there in the middle. Notice how this first chord doesn't contain the third. We just got the root, fifth, and doubling of the root. However, the third does come in here, so don't worry too much that this first initial glance at the chord you cannot see the third. The third isn't there. Because it arrives here, then by this point you've really established that sound of it being a D major chord. So the last chord of this section is a G, and once again it's the same as the first chord of this section. So we're going to need to add the third, and we're going to double the root. So remember, unfortunately you can't have a fifth, or at least I'm choosing not to have a fifth, just because I like to play those top three strings together. You know, when I'm actually playing the arrangement on the guitar, that feels the best to me. So now we've come to the last section, which is a repeat of the A section. What we're going to do, just as before, we're just going to copy and paste, but I'm going to leave out that last G chord. I'm going to explain why I've done that in just a second. Let's copy that. We're going to paste it, and as I say, we're going to leave out this last G chord for now. And once again, we can make a few little tweaks here. I'm going to leave this first G chord alone. Remember, the first chord, you want it to be a root position chord, really. That sounds nice and strong. I'm going to take out the inversion here. C chord I'm just going to leave alone as usual. Here I'm going to put the inversion back in. So taking away the root note and making the third of the chord the bass note. And as you can see, once again, we've got some nice bass note movement here from the C to the B in the G chord, back to the C there. Our next chord we come to is this inverted D chord, and I'm going to take the inversion out here. The reason being is this is the final cadence of our piece. So we want this to be a really strong cadence. And the strongest cadence you can get is a perfect cadence, which is a root position chord followed by another root position chord. So if we had kept that inversion in, it wouldn't have been such a strong cadence. But taking the inversion out, now we've got a root position D chord. So we're going to have a strong cadence leading to this final G chord. So now we come to the final G chord, and I'm going to add the fifth to start with. I'm also going to break one of the rules I told you earlier, and I'm going to add the interval of a third down here. Now the reason I'm doing this is because when you listen to a piece of music, think of it as going on a journey. And when you come to the end of your journey, you really want to feel like you've arrived back home again. Now that feeling of arriving back home, you could get away with just having the root and the fifth, but it wouldn't be quite as satisfying as having a full chord here with the root, the third and the fifth. So to really get that sense of the piece being finished, of arriving back home, you need to have all your chord tones there, the root, the third and the fifth. There's another reason as well. So we're not going to finger pick this last chord, we're actually going to strum it with our thumb. And if you didn't have the third there, that would just be a bit awkward. You'd have to mute that fifth string when you're doing your strum. So it just wouldn't sound very good. So we're going to insert the third back in. And we're just going to use this sign just to indicate that this last chord is to be strummed. Okay, so that's our finished arrangement. So let's give it another listen all the way through. Okay, so I'm pretty happy with that. That's a decent beginner's level arrangement. Just want to mention there's going to be 3 more videos in this series. So the next video is going to be looking at the fingering for this arrangement. That's actually a really important part of making an arrangement, is making sure that the fingering's good so the guitarist can play it nice and easy to whatever level he's at. And then the third lesson in this series, we're going to look at just making a few small improvements and a few changes to the arrangement. So we're going to have a bit more movement between the chords. We're also going to have a look at some basic chord substitution just to add a bit more interest. And then the last tutorial in this series, we'll be looking at doing an intermediate arrangement of this piece, which is going to be in a different key. I'm going to explain to you why this intermediate arrangement is superior to this beginner's level arrangement as well. But that's all for now, and I'll see you soon for the next video.